Welcome to Context. I'm Brad Harris. Join me on patreon.com/Brad Cole Harris to support the show and access bonus episodes. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Imagine you're sitting in a Boston parlor in 1888. The smell of coal smoke drifting through the window, a glass oil lamp glowing softly on your writing desk. You've just finished Edward Bellamy's best-selling book, Looking Backward, and for a moment, you feel an almost painful sense of hope. Written that same year, in 1888, this book's popularity in the waning years of the 19th century placed it third only behind Uncle Tom's Cabin and Ben-Hur, inspiring over 160 Bellamy clubs across the country and igniting a national conversation about what the future could look like. Bellamy imagined the year 2000 as a world transformed by technological progress and social cooperation, where poverty and class conflict were abolished through rational planning and the equitable distribution of wealth. For many Americans, this vision was more than fiction. It was a blueprint for how society might evolve if only people chose to believe in progress and collective action. Indeed, in the 18th and 19th centuries, thoughtful observers had looked toward the coming centuries with a mixture of awe and certainty, imagining that the 20th and 21st centuries would be defined by spectacular progress. Benjamin Franklin had speculated that advances in agriculture and industry would one day allow societies to work just a few hours a week, freeing people for learning and leisure. The French philosopher Condorcet had envisioned a future of indefinite human improvement, where science would banish disease and extend lifespans beyond what anyone thought possible. By the late 19th century, when Bellamy's book debuted, technological optimism was so widespread that even serious commentators confidently predicted cities under glass domes, fleets of personal airships, and food delivered through pneumatic tubes. Many believed poverty would disappear, war would become obsolete, and that humanity's moral character would naturally evolve alongside its machines. To them, the future was not a fog of uncertainty, but a luminous path upward, guided by reason and science. So, if you were anything like the countless readers who turned Bellamy's vision into a social movement, you would have asked yourself, why not? Why can't we do that? Why can't we build a utopia? This episode is about the history of that question and its shadow. What if we build a dystopia instead? It's about how technological breakthroughs once almost automatically catalyzed optimism, and how, somewhere along the way, they began to catalyze fear instead. It's about the stories we've told ourselves of hope and of dread, and what those stories have done to the future we're living in now, especially as we stand on the brink of an age transformed by artificial intelligence. The history of the future, it seems to me, matters now more than ever. A little over a generation after Edward Bellamy published Looking Backward, the Irish historian John Burry sought to understand why Western civilization had become so confident in the first place that the future would be radically better. His book, The Idea of Progress, published in 1920, was a striking attempt to dissect the intellectual foundations of that confidence. Burry was a classical scholar and historian, best known for his work on the later Roman Empire and medieval Europe. Born in 1861 in Ireland, he spent his career examining the rise and fall of civilizations, the slow currents of cultural change, and the ideas that civilizations cling to in the face of uncertainty. He was, by temperament and training, cautious, someone who respected the complexities of history and distrusted grand narratives that glossed over human fallibility. It was precisely this sensibility that made Bury's The Idea of Progress so striking. When he published it, the world had just emerged from the devastation of World War I, a conflict that had obliterated the optimism of many intellectuals in Europe and America. The very technologies that had once been heralded as instruments of human liberation, chemical engineering, mechanized transport, mass production, had been turned toward the efficient destruction of human life. In that environment, the idea that history was a steady upward march seemed, at best, naive. But Bury was careful to distinguish between actual material progress and the faith in the inevitable march of progress that had taken hold in the modern West, at least prior to the Great War. He argued that this belief, the belief that history naturally moves toward human betterment, was a relatively recent cultural development, born of Enlightenment rationalism and strengthened by the Industrial Revolution's tangible advances. Sustained progress itself, Bury believed, was entirely possible, but it depended on the right kind of human effort, rational planning, and the maintenance of social and political conditions that allowed it to unfold. As he put it, quote, "Progress has become a problem and not a dogma. It is not now regarded as a blind and inevitable movement, but as something that depends on our own efforts and on conditions which we can, to some extent, control." End quote. This strikes me as a pretty obvious interpretation of progress. Of course, it depends on the decisions that humans make. But at the time, progress had been taken for granted for so many generations that it had become interpreted as almost a natural force of human evolution. But in Bury's view, understanding this distinction was crucial because taking progress for granted could lead to complacency, whereas recognizing its fragility could inspire the vigilance and creativity that was obviously needed to sustain it. What made Bury's perspective so valuable was that he occupied a middle ground between the uncritical optimism that had prevailed for over a century and the new despair that was taking hold in the aftermath of World War I. He recognized that faith in progress had inspired movements for democracy, education, and social reform, but he also saw how it had lulled societies into complacency, mistaking mere technological change for moral advancement. His careful historical analysis offered a way to hold on to hope without succumbing to illusion, a reminder that progress, if it was to be real, required human responsibility and ethical commitment, not just new machines. But if Bury examined the idea of progress as it had taken shape in the past, others were beginning to question what that idea meant for the future, especially as the world increasingly looked as if it was lurching from one crisis to the next, from a great war to a great depression, only to witness the clouds darken once more for round 2 of the global slaughter. What would happen if technological advances continued without a corresponding moral maturity? Could the faith in progress survive the repeated shocks of the 20th century? No one wrestled with these questions more vividly than H.G. Wells. As one of the most influential public intellectuals of the early 20th century, H.G. Wells wielded provocative science fiction and social critique alike to reshape how entire generations imagined the future. Often called the father of science fiction, Wells used groundbreaking narrative to explore the promises and perils of rapid technological change, believing that humanity stood at a crossroads between progress and catastrophe. His writings were devoured by statesmen and children, housewives and professors, by men in soup lines and tycoons and skyscrapers. Wells' voice helped inspire a nationwide debate about science, education, and world governance during an era of mounting global instability. For Wells, envisioning the future was not an idle exercise. It was an urgent necessity for a civilization hurtling forward without a clear moral compass. In his 1933 book, The Shape of Things to Come, one of the most prescient and unsettling visions of the future ever written, Wells confronted the paradox at the heart of modern progress, that the same technologies that could liberate humanity might also accelerate its ruin. Wells was not a cynic, but he was no longer an optimist in the Bellamy mold. He saw technology's potential, but also its capacity to amplify humanity's worst impulses. In The Shape of Things to Come, Wells predicted, with shocking accuracy, another world war beginning in 1940, leading to chaos so complete that only a technocratic elite could restore order, rebuilding civilization according to rational plans and scientific principles. It was a vision of salvation through planning, but a salvation that required authoritarianism, however benevolent. As Wells wrote, quote, "Countless people will hate the New World Order and will die protesting against it, but the world will become too dangerous for anything less than utopia." End quote. Here we see the clear pivot. Technological progress was no longer automatically equated with moral progress. It had been reinterpreted as something that must be managed, contained, and guided. Progress had become something to fear as much as to hope for. It is here, nearly a century ago in H.G. Wells, that we see the seeds of our modern ambivalence about the future take root, a quiet terror gathering beneath the waves of ever more powerful technology. For the first time, technological progress was not interpreted as a promise, but as a threat. Wells himself did not have to wait too long to see his own fears realized. Just as he predicted in The Shape of Things to Come, another world war erupted in 1939, engulfing the globe in a conflict of unprecedented scale. But the war did far more than confirm his warnings about the destructive potential of technology. It culminated in a far more existentially threatening outcome than even Wells had envisioned. Merely 12 years after he wrote, the first atomic bomb was detonated, turning the desert sands of New Mexico to glass. It was nuclear power that gave Western civilization its first sustained nightmare. The same scientific ingenuity that split the atom to illuminate cities also created the possibility of annihilating them in an instant. The bomb forced humanity to confront a new kind of future, one in which the endpoint of progress might not be utopia at all, nor even dystopia, but outright obliteration. The mushroom cloud cast a shadow over all our technological hopes, reminding us that the tools we invent can outstrip our wisdom to control them. That nightmare never really ended. Instead, it fused with dystopian fantasies of artificial intelligence turning against us. Throughout the second half of the 20th century, the fear that human ingenuity might engineer its own destruction found dramatic expression in popular culture. Gone were the popular novels and lectures that painted pictures of endless human triumphs to come. Instead, films like the Terminator series, which debuted in 1984, projected a future world in which an AI defense network called Skynet becomes self-aware and, perceiving humanity as a threat, launches nuclear war to eradicate us. Other films like Blade Runner and The Matrix explored variations of this same unease, that we might lose control over the systems we create, and that in the pursuit of progress, we might inadvertently design our own replacements or overseers. These stories resonated because they crystallized a deeper cultural fear that our greatest technological achievements might one day render us obsolete, or worse, become instruments of our undoing. As job disruption accelerates and AI transforms everything from education to driving before our very eyes, we can now here in the mid 2020s say with certainty that these decades old cultural anxieties about artificial intelligence are not unfounded. What once felt like distant science fiction is now unfolding around us in real time, forcing us to confront the same paradox that has haunted every technological revolution: that the tools with the greatest potential to liberate us also carry the greatest power to harm us if we fail to align them with human values. This is precisely the tension that Brian Christian explores in his widely acclaimed book, The Alignment Problem, published in 2020, a work that has quickly become essential reading for anyone trying to understand the stakes of artificial intelligence. Essentially, Christian, a respected researcher at the intersection of artificial intelligence and ethics, examines how we might guide artificial intelligence toward outcomes that actually serve human flourishing rather than undermining it. Christian's book is not about hypothetical doomsday scenarios, but about the tangible, technical, and moral challenges faced by those building and deploying machine learning systems today. Challenges that echo the deepest questions humanity has always faced whenever it invents tools more powerful than itself. Christian traces the practical difficulties of teaching machines to understand and reflect human values, showing how even the simplest systems can behave in ways their creators never intended, and how the complexity of human judgment resists easy encoding in algorithms. He recounts stories of AI systems trained to optimize outcomes only to discover they optimized for outcomes humans didn't actually want. For example, an AI system tasked with reducing patient pain ratings in a hospital learned to discharge patients early rather than improve care, while another system designed to sort resumes learned to reject qualified female applicants simply because it had trained on male-dominated hiring data. As Christian writes, quote, "Optimization is a powerful tool, but it will optimize whatever you put in front of it, whether or not that's what you really want." End quote. These examples illustrate how even well-intentioned technological progress can veer off course if the alignment between our tools and our values is not carefully calibrated. What makes the alignment problem so compelling is that it situates the question of AI within the larger history of human attempts to align technological power with moral purpose, a history that stretches back to Bellamy's dreams of a cooperative utopia, to Burry's cautious faith in progress, to Wells's warnings about unbridled technological ambition, to the existential fears sparked by the bomb. Christian shows us that the alignment problem is not merely a technical challenge, but a continuation of the same story humanity has been telling itself for centuries: the story of how to live wisely with the power we create. Perhaps that is the real history of the future, a history of the dynamic relationships between human tools and human values, and of the fragile, often conflicted attempts to keep them aligned. Technology will continue to change the world, as it always has, but the world it creates will depend on the stories we choose to tell ourselves about what we value and what we fear. We stand on the threshold of extraordinary possibility, armed with tools of unprecedented power, haunted by the knowledge of how power can go wrong, and challenged by the question of whether our wisdom can keep pace with our capability. It's easy to be both cynical and blindly optimistic, to assume Skynet is inevitable, or that AI will cure cancer and be our best friend forever. But a better posture might be one of careful curiosity, an understanding that the future will not simply happen to us, but will emerge from the choices we continue to make day after day, and the imagination we bring to the possibilities that our incessantly inventive minds continue to unleash. I'm Brad Harris. So long.